Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Nasher's 360 Speaker Series. I'm Curator of Education, Anna Smith, and today I'm pleased to introduce artist Jessica Stockholder. Our guest of honor today, Jessica Stockholder, works at the ever-compelling juncture between painting and sculpture. Her work often addresses the architecture in which it has been conceived, deftly playing with forms that scale walls, cover floors, and spill out windows. Adding to the energy of Stockholder's work is her use of color, an element often overlooked in sculpture, adding a visceral vibrancy to constructions that skillfully address art historical themes. Stockholder has exhibited widely in museums and galleries around the world. Her solo exhibitions include the Power Plant Toronto, MoMA PS1 New York, and the Musée d'Art Moderne, Saint-Étienne Métropole, France. Her work is represented in the permanent collections of numerous museums, including the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, MoCA Los Angeles, SF MoMA, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the British Museum, and the Stedelijk Museum. We're delighted to have her here today, and I can't think of a better way to kick off our fall season. Please join me now in welcoming Jessica Stockholder.
Thanks for that introduction. So nice to be here, and it's an interesting context to speak in. The Nasher, which is all about sculpture, and my work is definitely sculpture, but also painting. Maybe we can get the slides turned on. I've set these slides on a timer so that they'll keep me moving along, and I want to make sure to show you a lot. But I can control them too. So this is an image from when I was in college, and it's a painting on canvas. And I just wanted to kind of give you some sense of how I moved from being a painter to whatever it is I am now, a kind of hybrid of both. This is masonite on the wall, and I think these are going a little fast. They're supposed to be 15 seconds, but I think they're going faster than that. And then this is 1985. It was in my father's backyard in Vancouver, which is where I grew up on the West Coast in Canada, though I was born in Seattle. So I am, like my work, a little bit of a hybrid. My parents were from New York, secular Jews, moved to Vancouver through Seattle, where they got PhDs. And so in that way, I've always felt myself to not be completely of any place I'm in. And I think my work kind of stems from that feeling about life in general, where the work is, I'm interested in painting and its boundedness. It's generally rectilinear. And I'm also really captivated by the surface of painting and the world and things and material, and how the surface is full of illusionistic opportunity. And though my work isn't illusionistic in that it's not generally mimetic, I'm not making pictures of things, it's very attentive to how the surface is full of feeling. This room is surfaced, and we tend to the surfaces of things, like electronics. We have, most of us, not all of us, but many of us have no idea how they work inside, and yet how they appear is very seductive. So it's that surface of things. It's also the surface that is, for me, that's a place of imagination, and it's metaphorically analogous to the feelings that we have of self and thought and feeling being. Where are those things, and are they things? They're without body, though they exist somehow in our bodies. So this work is from 2004. It's called Sam Ran Over Sand and Sand Ran Over Sam. So I showed you some really very early work and then jumped to this work that's 2004. And my work kind of grew from working with painting and materials to thinking about the architecture that the painting hung on, and thinking about the easel painting as a mirror of the wall that it's on. I was studying with Maury Baden in Canada, who is actually an American sculptor from California, who moved to Vancouver. And this is jumping back, a really early one again. He was really critical of unstretched canvas on the wall, and he talked about how an easel painting is contextual in that it like the wall is rectilinear and flat and mirrors the wall it's hung on, and you don't buy paintings and like place them on your furniture like they're intended for the wall. So thinking about that, I started to make things in relationship to the wall, and I wasn't prepared to give up my interest in materiality and had been mixing a lot of stuff with paint. So then this is called Kissing the Wall, and I made a series of those in 1985. This is another one when I finished graduate school. And I had developed a kind of installation way of working, like kind of in line with the piece I showed you, Sam Run Over Sand and Sand Run Over Sam, where the work didn't exist. You know, those works are ephemeral. The work didn't exist after the exhibition. And, you know, having an exhibition in one's studio isn't really the best way to greet a public. So that meant that, you know, what was I going to do on my own? So I developed a way of working that these pieces are, you know, were the first of, where I was acknowledging the wall, and many of them plugged in and had a light attached to them. So they were stuck in a very specific way to the specific electricity that flows from those walls into my work, but light appears static. So I was, so those pieces, I think it was, I saw a show of Heidi Fosnock's in New York, and her work was about that scale, a kind of furniture scale. And I looked at those and thought, well, that's something, you know, that's where I should be. So I have since then been making work in the studio and making work like the one you're looking at, which is called Sign Waving Blush. This was 2002 in St. Gallen, Switzerland. This one happens to be permanent, and there's a kind of handful of permanent commissions I've done like this, and many more ephemeral works. This was commissioned by the Credit Suisse Bank in Switzerland. And there's where you're standing here looking at this image, there's roads on both sides of you kind of splitting, going on, you know, kind of a road that is split by that building and sculpture. And this is an oversized bench, so when you sit on the bench, you feel small. And I'm often, in all of my work, I'm interested in the relationship between the body and the scale of being a body and the work that you're looking at. So if you're looking at a small painting on the wall, it's the activity is between your head and the painting. Even so, you have to be at the right distance to see the work. And as things get larger, your body becomes part of what's at stake in relationship to apprehending the work. This is called Landscape Linoleum, 1998 in Middelheim in Belgium. And I was invited to make a work that was, it's a temporary work, and they have a permanent sculpture collection, and you can see as these images move along, the bronze sculptures were not my work, they were part of their permanent collection. And they also have a contemporary section, and I chose to make the work in this more classical section. And I was thinking about the grass and the kind of wall of trees as two surfaces that I was working against, in much the same way that I work against a white wall inside a gallery or a museum. And I cast these concrete kind of pedestals to be in concert with the pedestals of the sculptures. And also, you can see cut a hole in the ground there. So, and paint, there's some green on green, and then a scaffolding of cars without engines. So I was noticing the work that I did in museums and galleries and interior spaces in the white cube. I was very aware of and thinking about how the white cube is in fact not neutral. And there was a series of essays in the 70s by Brown O'Doherty, titled The White Cube, that were published in Art Forum. And the thinking and thoughts in those essays was kind of floating around when I was younger, part of the world I was in. And so I was very aware of the white wall and the white cube as an artifice, something that we made, and we propose it to be empty and neutral when it's not. And I was thinking about here the park as quite similar to that this isn't actually nature. Lawns, cultivated lawns like that aren't nature, they're an artifice. And the green surface of the ground is like a painted color. And then, so my work was seen against the background of the wall and the ground, the planes. And in that way, I think of Anthony Caro is a sculptor I really care about, because he too presents planes in space. And when you look at some of his, not all of it, but some of his work is about how those planes kind of flatten from a certain point of view. And color works that way. That color, this is a different work in the same park. This was commissioned and is still there, I believe. These are actually photographs that Richard Rezac took when he was there and shared with me. He's a Chicago sculptor. And so this is related to that larger sculpture here. The bushes are part of it, the cast columns of concrete, and there's some painted gravel on the ground. And there's actually, I don't think you can see so well in these pictures, there's a tractor seat that you can sit on. And then the rope that you see makes a kind of drawing or line in space. And in all of these works, this is in Andover, so it's another related work. In all of these works, I'm interested in how moving around, there are certain points of view from which the work becomes very coherent and very pictorial. And of course, photography does a good job of capturing the pictorial, because photographs are flat and framed. But when you actually see the work, sometimes the work is, to me as a viewer anyway, sometimes the work is more satisfyingly composed and complete and very formal and static as a picture. And at other times, the experience of the work is more fragmented and disorienting. So as you move around the work, they're very different experiences. And it's also, I think in that way, a little bit filmic, in that as you move around, your memory of one side of the work informs or at least if it does for me, informs the picture I'm looking at from the other side. So it's interesting to think about what a picture is in that respect. And the line, I'm also interested in the speed at which my eye moves, so using those ropes and lines. Your eye kind of, it's like a zip in the landscape, and your eye like quickly takes it in. But to actually traverse that space with your body takes a long time. And so my work is about that kind of disjuncture between the mind and the body. It's very much rooted in the relationship between mind and body in a lot of different ways. And I often, this is still in Andover, I often provide places to sit, benches and or bleachers. I've done that in many works, where your body then becomes part of the work. And there's a theatricality involved in that. I was talking with Jeremy over lunch about art and objecthood, Michael Fried's art and objecthood, where he's railing against the theatricality of art that has emerged when sculpture comes off the pedestal. And I have a lot of feeling for what he didn't like in that. And my work is, it's clearly got a lot of theater in it. But I'm also really clear that I'm not making environments. I don't want to erase the world that the work is in or the room that the work is in. I really enjoy in exhibition spaces opening the windows, having the work exist inside and outside. So I want the work to be at once autonomous and coherent as a thing of itself, its own, and also be woven into the circumstance in which it's in. This is called landscape linoleum. Oh, sorry, no, it's not. It's called Flooded Chambers Made. It was in Madison Square Park in 2009. It was there, I think, for 6 months or so. And it's actually been moved, and some of the images you'll see, it was moved to Laumeier Sculpture Park, where it is now. And so this work, it was specific to this park-like situation, 2 planes of grass on either side of a walkway. And this is a small garden that's planted on the other side of bleachers that you could sit on and look down at the platform that you saw earlier, or stand on and look down on this garden, which actually never really took off. It was a really rainy summer in New York, and it kept getting flooded, so the garden didn't do what I might have wished for. But again, this platform offers the chance to all different times of day, all different kinds of people used it. During the day, on the week, there were little kids on it, and the geometry. I think maybe starting kind of around with this work, and since then I've been using a lot of triangles, and I like the triangle because it's a fragment of a rectangle, and my work, though it looks maybe not so minimal and simple, in fact, I think my work is really heavily informed by the minimalists, and I love that work, and I think their work really called attention to the space of the viewer in front of the work, in a way opening up space for the work that I make. And so my work is always related to a grid. Maybe you could argue that everybody's work is in some way always related to a grid. But I'm very aware of how that's true in my work, and that there are grids in almost all of the architectural buildings that we occupy. I mean, you can certainly see them here on the walls. And starting with the frame of a painting, which is a rectangle, and then the pedestal, which is often rectilinear. And so my work, though it isn't itself it doesn't itself sit neatly inside of a frame. It's in concert with the frame that is implied and that it transgresses. So the triangle is being a fragment of a rectangle, is also like a rectangle, very coherent and unified, but points outward past itself, and it's very dynamic that way. And also, endless varieties of what a triangle might be. And if you follow the lines, you can make kind of rational decisions based on following how the lines meet each other, and then make completely irrational decisions. And I think in my work, the work is an opportunity to sort of get to expand my own mind to think things that I couldn't think. So if I was just sitting down in front of a piece of paper writing, I couldn't think the things I make, or sitting in front of a piece of paper drawing. So the work is an opportunity to both follow the rational qualities of my mind and then find eccentric thought, ways to let an eccentric thought happen, a thought that couldn't be planned. More recently, well, I guess some years ago when I was teaching at Yale, Clinton Jukala organized, a painter, he organized a little panel about abstraction and what is abstraction. He invited me to be on this panel. And it was the first time I'd thought, well, is my work abstract? What is abstraction? What does that mean? And I don't think that I certainly didn't think it was abstract. That's not how I describe my work. It's not how, I don't think it's all about abstraction. It isn't itself abstract. But it is, I think, about abstraction in that, I think words are among the most abstract things we deal with. Words are completely divorced from the thing that they reference. They're an abstract kind of piece of currency that we pass around between each other, distinct from our experiences and the things that they connotate. And so I'm really interested in how abstraction organizes thought and experience, and how abstraction is kind of parallel to thinking about pictures, because picture making is also quite distinct in a way from experience. Though we look at photographs or realistic paintings and think, oh, that's a picture of so-and-so or this place, in fact, being with people or in places is nothing like looking at pictures. So the pictures are always very abstract in that way. And I think that's, I think there's a real comfort in abstraction. Abstraction allows us to be coherent with each other and allows us to make sense of life and feel some sense of control moving through life. And I think that the pictorial does that too. So for me, I'm aware of, in my work, orchestrating both a kind of clear, very formal, very controlled experience, and doing that out of a kind of chaos of material, like introducing so much material into the equation that I can't actually be responsible for what it all means in every little detail. So there's a clarity that intersects a kind of happenstance, serendipity, chaos that is part of life. And for me, it's a kind of acknowledging that both that's what it is to be alive, both of those things. This work is called Peer Out to Sea. It was at the Crystal Palace in Reina Sofia in Madrid in 2010, and the Crystal Palace, it was built. I think it was part of a World's Fair there. And so it wasn't built for a practical reason. And it's a space that's a bit like being inside and outside at the same time. There's lots of chinks in the glass and birds fly in. And there were steps onto this platform, so you couldn't actually be in the space at ground level. You could only be in there and see everything from this platform. And this is algae growing on the surface of water. And pigment on the floor that's making the color there. And then there's the brown on the platform is burnt. It's like a burnt wood. So I care a lot about the materiality of color, and so I'm interested in the surface, as I talked about before, but also what that surface is made out of. And when the surface is, here there's a depth to the pigment, and the algae is a live thing. So there are qualities of the material that you're looking at that are a little bit counter to the formality of the image that the materials serve to make. And I just find a real kind of pleasure in that contradiction. And then this column is made out of a whole bunch of plastic containers. They're colored at the bottom, and then they move to be white and more transparent or translucent at the top, where it was very, very hot, and they started to melt a little bit. And the materials I use, in some ways, well, let me talk about this first, and then I'll get back to the materials, which I can talk about it in relationship to almost any work. This was a piece, it was called Hollow Places, well, the show was called Hollow Places Fat and Hollow Places Thin in Ash Tree Wood at the Aldrich Museum. And it was made from an old ash tree that was cut down from the backyard of the museum. And they'd had it there before. They invited me to do the show and offered me the material to work with. And as I said earlier, grew up in Vancouver in Canada, where the Northwest Coast Indian arts are very present. And that community has real presence in Vancouver and in Canada generally. And there were a lot of totem poles in the parks that I played in. And I think some of those traditions, the Haida tradition, the Kwakiutl tradition, which is both a tradition and a current practice, are extraordinary and for me, really very influential. So these oval-shaped mirrors, they're driveway mirrors that you're looking at the work through. They're for me resonant with the oval shape that organizes a lot of the iconography of that work. And I started to, and this is a kind of another room, the same ash tree woods with silkscreen prints on these pieces that can kind of be in relationship to each other in no fixed way. They're like leaves on the trees. When leaves fall off a tree, there's a kind of a random pattern, and these kind of participated in that kind of random patterning. But the oval shape of the eye, I see it in that work as related to the eye. And I started to think about this as their tradition, as a really other pictorial tradition, where totem poles orchestrate, they're very sculptural and physical, and you have the kind of illusion of animals stacked on top of each other, or different kinds of beings stacked on top of each other. But they're organized in a very, very formal way. So though I'm not privy to the details of the culture and the symbols and know what those poles signify, the formality of them is intensely beautiful and clearly related to making sense of one's relationship to the natural world. So to think about that as a whole other pictorial tradition was really exciting to me in relationship to my interest in the pictorial. This work is called Color Jam, and it was in Chicago in 2012, shortly after I moved there. And it occupies an intersection, and I kind of enjoy that the work intersects the intersection, and that it's also very hard to be in an intersection. You can't really stand in the middle of the road and experience it. You can drive through it. You can walk across the crosswalks. And this way of making a picture to kind of like slap it on top of an intersection is also a kind of interest in the boundaries of picture making. The history of picture making that I grow from has more to do with the history of Western painting and frames, and I think about that as connected to windows, looking through windows, and walls, which tend to be rectilinear. And the intersection, too, in the city grid is rectilinear. What was exciting about this, and there's more images coming up here of this one in Houston, which just came down, what's exciting is that the codes and regulations attached to the road and the sidewalk are really different. Different jurisdictions, determine what's allowed in those places. Different people own the buildings that the work is made in relationship to. Different people occupy the buildings. There are people renting space there and businesses. And so in both cases, I worked with a civic organization. I was invited by the organization to make the work, and the work couldn't happen without that kind of a government civic organization. There were people, they're private and government, and bridging the gap between private people and knowing the people in the buildings and having a working relationship with government officials. And so here, the Houston Downtown Management Organization facilitated making this work happen, something I could never do on my own. No one would ever let a private person go and do that. You'd need to have some help from all these organizations. So that seems to me to sit kind of alongside the questions about boundary that are inherent in picture making. And I'm always interested in the fact that there are boundaries, and that the boundaries and edges need to be there in order to see anything or to cohere thought. And at the same time, that when you move the boundary or question it, or like just turn your head, everything changes. And I'm interested in that literally and physically, and also in how that physical experience is metaphoric in our thinking and in our understanding of ourselves. This was called Butterfly Legs. It's presently in a museum in Toulouse called Les Abattoirs. But it was commissioned by a school in France It was a long period. It happened over a long period of time, 2007 to 13. And this work was made for a young person's school, children. And this is a garden that would have been part of their school. And maybe it will be moved to the schoolyard. But I think for all kinds of reasons that I don't really understand, not because I'm not living there, it didn't happen yet. I think the school is being renovated, and but not bad for me that it was in the museum too. This is called Like Water, If Pond as Lily. It was finished in 2014. It's at Mission Bay Hospital in San Francisco. So if you're there, you can go see it. It's at the entryway of the museum, and it was a really lovely project because it intersected the building of the architecture. And it doesn't happen very often that architects really want artists' work to intersect their buildings. And in this case, the people commissioning the building really wanted this to happen and facilitated that to happen and had people in place to create conversation between me and the architects and to let that happen. So these are benches outside. They're cast concrete, and the top is resin. The texture of the top is made with styrofoam molds that have been kind of channeled, so you can actually see it feels a little bit like styrofoam on top. And those benches sit in front of a window that is artisanal glass. And this is another bench inside the lobby of the museum. And the ceiling is also part of the work, is echoing some of the shapes of the work. So that's I think that's the kind of only work I've made like that. And this is a frieze of kind of corrugated resin that's in concert with images on the glass and the benches outside. So I was going to say about the objects I use generally that in some way, it doesn't matter what objects I use, that I can make art out of anything. It's not like I need to suffer and the world has to deliver me exactly the right material. And that part of what I'm interested in is, that I have something to do, something that's abstract, that meets the physicality and the reality of materials out there in the world. And on the other hand, of course it matters what I use, and no one else is choosing the materials. I am, and there's obviously significance in that. And I'm interested in, and as I've made this work over the years, I think I make this work in part because I needed some help looking. I wasn't a person that was born noticing everything, and I had two academics for parents, and they lived in their heads. So I think the work was in part a way for me to really notice the world. And as I've been making work for some years now, I'm more and more interested in the stuff that I make work out of. And I'm interested in how everything is multivalent. And I think about that in relationship to psychoanalytic theory, where if you're looking at a dream, the significance of the dream is a shifting thing. It's a moving target. Dreams don't mean just one thing. They mean different things in relationship to what memory you have that you're bringing to it and how you're thinking about it. And I think objects are like that too. I mean, if you look at a chair, it's very easy. You say chair, and if I wasn't looking closely at these chairs you're sitting on here now, I'd leave and never remember what these chairs look like. Just that they are chairs and that I can put the word to them is enough to move through the day most of the time. But then if you look closely at any object, the chair, where it's made, how it's made, what period of time it refers to, all of those things are full of significance. And what color it is, from my point of view, I care about color a lot. What color it is, what weight it has, what scale relationships it has. And if you don't use the object as it was proposed to be used, here you're looking at a lot of objects, you might not even know what the object's for, or it might take a little while to know what the object's for. And in these works, I mean, it's not a puzzle. It's not a linguistic puzzle where I'm expecting viewers, or where I myself am sitting there putting names to all these objects. It's not really based in language in that way. I'm more interested in actually how those objects are in space and how they feel physically, and often what the surfaces are like. This piece was called Lay of the Land, and it was made here, and this was in Pianello in Italy. It was part of a show. Well, actually, it was I think 16 solo shows that Paolo Baldacci put together in this small town in Italy. Very ambitious thing to do, and a very chaotic experience, but it happened, and that's often the way things are. So this was an old bowling alley where this work was, and the blue floor there was a kind of deck that I had constructed over the bowling alleys, and it runs into a walkway that you've probably seen. So this piece I made there, and then the other pieces on this platform were pieces that were from my studio that had been shipped there. So the bowling alley is a really particular space with a history. And then this kind of structure I made, the blue floor and these walls against which I showed work, were more like a white cube exhibition space. And I've done a whole bunch of work I mean, this piece that you're looking at, it's a piece from my studio. It hangs on the wall. It's autonomous. It's related to painting, but it's also material and sculpture, and those are ping pong balls. But I've done a lot of work where I'm thinking about the display and presentation of the work. I guess you could think about Brancusi, where the pedestal is also the sculpture. And those ideas about how display and presentation are very much part of the work and how it's meaningful, I am interested in exploring in a lot of different ways that are also, I guess, related to Gordon Matta Clark, who's cutting buildings and cutting buildings in half and through walls. How the work is and isn't knit tightly to how it's displayed and where it's displayed is a question I'm always interested in. This was called, what was it called? The Tangled Angle at the Miami Art Fair in 2014. So it's part of a whole bunch of work that's displayed in front of the museum there. And again, this is triangles. So there are bollards that are a set of yellow bollards that form a triangle and a set of blue bollards that form another triangle. And they intersect and sit on top of this triangle of gravel. And then there's a big kind of lamp post with a base. The lights were mostly on, but I had limited opportunity to take photographs, so I have these ones. So in this case, the work is framed by the grass it's sitting on. Because it's a group exhibition of sorts, there's all different kinds of sculptures scattered around. The work needed to have a coherent boundary and also some height. How am I doing for time here? Okay. So I'll stop in a few moments, and the slides can keep going and open it up for questions. But let me just say that color matters to me a great deal, I think, because it is, I think it's like it's like the way I came to making all of this work at all. I really love color. I love that it is a physical experience, and it's attached to material, but it's also in air, and light travels it to your eyes. So it has a very complicated relationship to being physical, which I think is true of us humans also. What else? Oh, let me just also say that I'm interested, well, maybe I'll just stop there and answer questions. So thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you.
I'm a huge fan. Thanks for coming. So I have a question. Is there a role, does drawing play a role in your work? And then the connection between drawing and intuition, if there is one.
There'll be some drawings that come up as the slides flip along here. Actually, over the last few years, I guess about 5 years ago, I started working on a set of drawings that I called strip drawings, and I think you'll see some. And that was, for me, the most kind of gripping, evocative drawing project I've had, where the drawing project was not about something else. It was about itself. In general, I make drawings when I'm invited to make a work somewhere else. I go see the space or place and get a sense of what the scale is and what's possible given the facilities and resources of the place and help. And then I make drawings that are organizational drawings as a kind of point of departure. I think about them a little bit like Alan Capro's recipes. You know, Alan Capro was, the word happening came from him in relationship to kind of performative eventfulness. And so it's like he made recipes for his happenings, and my drawings are a bit like that. They don't, if you looked at the drawings before the work existed, you would have no idea that what they were going to yield. But in retrospect, they make sense. And drawing, I find drawing is challenging, in a way more challenging than making paintings and sculpture, working with stuff, because the page is empty and it has to just come from me, where, working with stuff, there's all kinds of, it's like having other people around. And actually, that is one of the nice things about working with all these different kinds of materials and objects, that most of them are made by other people. So in fact, other people's ideas and thoughts are embedded in them. So a few slides, this is my show at Kavi Gupta's gallery. It was called Door Hinges in 2015. And the next big show I had was last fall in New York, and the images will come up next. And actually, the image that you guys have on this little folder is from the show in New York. And you would stand on that platform, and there were a whole bunch of drawings that the platform enabled you to look at. And those were the strip drawings that were like an attempt to catch the space between intention and practiced action. I said that wrong. Intentional practice action, and like who knows where the idea is coming from and what the gesture's about, the space between those things. So they kind of, sometimes they look like letters, sometimes they look like scribbles, but they march across a long, thin page. So I think, drawing is, actually about that space in a way. You sit down and the pencil, if it is a pencil you're using, or a pen, or whatever it is. It's an opportunity to operate with a lot of knowns and then also discover things. So there's also some people over here who are trying to ask questions in the second row. Yeah, next.
I noticed a lot of your work is done in public spaces. Is that intentional on your part? I think it's important for art to be in public spaces, but can you just comment on whether or not that's intentional on your part?
Well, it's hard to say. That's an interesting question. I mean, I think as an artist, first of all, in my studio, the whole question of intention is a complicated question. One works within the circumstances available to one, one's capacities, skill capacities, knowledge capacities, financial capacity, time capacity. So always you work within what's possible. And making great art doesn't depend on lots of money. It depends on making good use of your capacities. And whether or not the work is public is not always a choice for an artist. You know, I mean, I'm really fortunate to have been invited to make work available in public places, and I've really enjoyed it, and I'm really happy to do it. So it's a choice, and that's, you know, I'm invited, and I am really happy to say yes. But it's, but in addition to that, I think that what I can do in public is, like in an outdoor public space, is really different than what one can do in a museum space or a gallery space. All three of those spaces have different possibilities inherent in them, and really different than what I do in my studio. And I value all of those circumstances. I really value making art as a personal thing. I mean, my work isn't interesting to other people because of my biography. It's interesting because of what I've made of myself and my biography that is resonant with things that other people share. But I value the art place as a place that allows me to be more aware of the extent to which I have choice in the matter of and will. I think it does that for artists generally, for people. Art is a place where you set your own agenda and you do what you want. And it's very easy to say that. It's actually not so easy to do. I mean, because most of life you're learning things that are shared, and, you know, learning how to do things for which there's a right and a wrong way. Let me just quickly address this, what you're looking at. These works that are moving by I called assists. And this assist is attached to a piano. And if you were to buy it, you wouldn't get the piano. So you would have to supply your own support for it. So that's a new body of work that I'm quite invested in. So if you buy a painting, you need to supply the wall for the painting, and no one questions that. So it's hard for people to, you know, like if you walk into the gallery and you see my assist tied to the piano, it would never occur to you that the piano wasn't part of it. So it's a bit of a challenge to move that work into the world, but I'm working on it. This gentleman's been trying to ask.
Just curious, much of what you've shown seems to be works that were put up temporarily, ephemeral works, as you refer to them. Does that make you feel sad when they're taken down? Well,
when I was younger, I didn't feel any sadness about that at all. And the ephemerality of the work enables a whole bunch of things. I mean, to have made work at really big scale, you couldn't do that if the work wasn't ephemeral. You know, I mean, materials have to be expensive and archival. Paying to store work is a really big deal. If the work doesn't have a buyer and you have made this enormous thing, you know, that's like having an albatross around your neck. When I grew up in Canada, like I said, and there was I think a whole bunch of, you know, installation work there because the government does a lot more funding of art than happens here. And so there was that, and then I went to graduate school, and I had no possibility of storing work. So I didn't even notice that I was making work that was ephemeral until I, you know, finished school, and then I realized I developed this way of working that yielded something that was eventful. You know, it disappeared. So I really appreciate the kind of freedom that comes from making things that way, and the scale at which I can work, and, you know, like the work in the park, in the classical section of the park. No one would want that there forever. That would be a disservice to the classical sculpture. But to have it there for a short period of time, I think, brought something to the classical sculpture, and then, you know, it was gone. And the pieces in the intersection, because of the various kinds of ownership of that space, be very unlikely anybody would want that there for an extended period of time. So so I appreciate the area that I've worked in that way. On the other hand, it's true that because the work is ephemeral and doesn't then travel, and I think it's not so great for a career in some ways. And Mi-Wan Kwan wrote a book, One Place After Another. She's an LA, I think she teaches at UCLA, and she's an art history critic kind of person. That's about the history of site-related work. And she talks about the fact that particularly a lot of women have worked that way. And then, the work falls out of history because it's not existent anymore. Things fall out of mind when they're not there. So I noticed that. On the other hand, I also make a lot of work that is in the world and care about that too. So.
Hello. So I have a question, maybe a couple of parts, time and collecting of materials. And you've talked a little bit about both of these things, but I'm curious when I look at an installation or a work, especially works that are, well, all of your works are outside of your studio. So I'm curious if some things that are parts of the shows are predetermined and complete and shipped over, and then they're combined with materials that are of that location, or if it varies. I'm also curious about how much time you spend in a place constructing a work.
Well, usually the work that I make that is large and site-related, I don't make anything beforehand, okay, or very little. I mean, occasionally there's a one or two things, but usually I like I said, I go see the place and then go back, and I might be in touch with people beforehand and ask, for things to be collected before I get there. Like I did a piece in Dijon, France many years ago and asked for a lime green couch. And the couch arrived and it was actually the color of limes, dark green, and that was very funny, it's like, because, for lime green for us evokes like a bright, flashy green. So I'm interested in that. I mean, there's a kind of I sort of make use of stuff. And so in a way, it's a kind of a performance, too. If you go somewhere to make something in public, people are watching, there's a time limit. It's a whole different way of working than to be in the studio and like make some of these pieces you see in here. And like some of the pieces in the studio could take a long time. I might make, because I sort of start things in the studio until the studio is full. It's much easier to start things than to finish them, and then I have to finish them. So some pieces take a year or something. Other pieces happen more quickly in the studio. But for one of those pieces I travel to make, it's 2 weeks is kind of normal. Okay. Yeah.
I'm also curious. You've addressed this a little bit, but how much of your hand is in the work, and what does it look like to work with a team? Is it really important for you to monitor everything, to touch the materials and respond intuitively, or can you just tell people, hey, make a big purple shape over there?
Well, that's a good question, and the whole range of answers to it. Yeah. I work alone in the studio, and it's really important to me that I do, and that my hand's in the work. And there's a kind of thought process in making things, and finding out what they are, and breaking them, and all kinds of things that happen through being involved in manipulating material that I really value. And then working, commissioned work, like the piece at the hospital, Mission Bay Hospital, I didn't make any of those things. I made a model. And the model is necessarily really different, But I care about material and what is essential about it. It's not an accident that I use a particular material. So knowing more about, like I go and see how things are made, talk to the people making things. When I'm not making the thing, I want the way the material is used to be part of its meaning, even if I didn't make it. So different things are possible. My skills and capacities are limited, and if somebody else manufactures something for me, different things are possible than when I make things myself, and there's something gained and something lost. So.
Thank you.
There's a question over here. Anna? Oh, sorry.
Talk about your work in the pastoral and the movement into abstraction, and a lot of your outdoor pieces that's you're using materials in nature, and how they relate to color.
So like the relationship to the landscape is kind of what you're asking? Oh, well, I'm not sure what you're asking exactly. I mean, I don't know if there's a linear answer to that, because I guess the natural world, like a tree versus a car. Well, I think well, first of all, I really care about landscape. Vancouver's landscape is extraordinary. I mean, you look over water to islands, you have like a double horizon line where the water meets the island, and then the sky, the hills or mountains on the island meet the sky above. And then there's this feeling of flattening that happens when you're looking across the water there. But, it's kind of pictorial, and it denies the space. So I care about that apprehension of landscape. And I also care about how landscape, I care about the place of places and feeling tied to and rooted to places. It matters to me. And the whole pictorial thing that I care about is related, to looking at landscape. We look at landscapes, and there's something about scale in the body and the relationship of the body to a landscape, different relationships, different landscapes, that matters to me. Those are all like feelings of connectedness and place, and I'm not sure where your question's rooted. Maybe some dichotomy between the natural world and the world that we make. Yes. I think that I feel really strongly about my connection or lack thereof to the means of the support of me and then us. I care about gardening and how food's produced and composting, and Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, really matters to me. That whole world of tending to, I think it has something to do with our culture, the way we make things, the mass production of things, plastics, and the enormous numbers of chemicals we make. There's a sort of isolating factor in our culture. We live in a sort of bubbles. We don't live in caves, and we don't spend a lot of time, most of us, cultivating the ground, et cetera. I mean, it's all kind of obvious. But that's part of the world we live in that I care about. I care about those facts. My work isn't ideologically driven. It's not it's not like saying something's good or bad. I think my work addresses the kind of magpie quality of us people. I love color, and plastics have beautiful colors in them. So when I use a lot of plastic and stuff that, the stuff that our production systems are making, I'm not using it to say it's good or bad. I'm using it because I'm a human being and I have a response to it. And I think that that my work is also about opening up space for the complexity of what we are. And I don't think that, all the problems to the extent that I'm ideological and I do have politics and care about the world we live in, it's interesting. I think that the struggle for people is to be, accepting of the complexity of what we are, that we like things that might, that are problematic, and you can't just deny us the things we like and all our problems will be solved. So my work is about pleasure and beauty and in relationship to landscape and artifice. I mean, it's kind of a wandering answer in relationship to your question, but.
I don't know. Can you hear? Is this on? Okay. First of all, it's a really great treat to have you here and to see these and hear you talk about them. But I want to kind of go back to where you started with the canvas and the rectilinear form and moving off of that form and then going back in your relationship with the photographer who shoots your work or how your work gets re-imaged or represented. Because as an installation artist, I find that that's one of the trickiest parts because these things move on, but those images are what come to represent that work. Can you talk a little bit about how you edit that or control that, or how you know, what your relationship is to that representation that lives on?
Well, I always take photographs myself, and that matters to me. And also, I mean, photography's changed a lot over the years I've been making art. I mean, first of all, it was slides and 4x5 negatives, and now it's digital for the most part. I like the digital photography because it handles mixed light better than film does, and I often use a lot of different light sources in my work. I like, you know, daylight, and I'm interested in the colors of incandescent light, and color is dependent on light, so the lights matter a lot. So I enjoy digital photography because it makes that a little easier, that part of things. I don't suffer over. I mean, there's limits to what you can control, and so I do the best I can.
Yes, I'm interested in going way back, and you talk about your parents being intellectuals or in their head, and I'm wondering if you had a lot of conversations with them growing up, because even in your description of your work and where you're coming from and what you were trying to do or say, and it's kind of an intellectual conversation, and I'm wondering how much of that you talked to them about when you were starting early on your career, and if you had siblings that interacted with you as well.
Well, I think I do what I do because it was very hard to talk about. I mean, I loved my parents. My dad's still alive, and I love both of my parents. And it was not a bad way to grow up, to be around all these academics arguing with each other. My mom was really interested in Freud and Shakespeare, and my dad in Marx and popular culture and poetry, and they fought all the time, always argued with each other. Because I think at that time, Marx and Freud didn't sit easily together. And but no, I didn't talk to them at all about my art. Because I didn't actually have. I mean, it took me a long time to find words to put to my work. Because though I have all of these things to say about the work, and they're honest things. I mean, it's not like I'm making. I care about, you know, boundary and presentation and pedestal and context. And this was a show that very much about that. Ian Barry at the Tang Museum invited me to co-curate with him. So this is a show that's very much about pedestals and different ways of presenting things. But no, I mean, I think I chose to make work that's really not verbal. The work itself is not verbal. It's physical and visual and sensual, and you know, it's not work that.
So your parents didn't ask you to explain what you were doing or why?
They did, but when somebody says to you, "So, Jessica, what does this mean?" That's not a good question. And I didn't really answer it, you know. So, And so no, I think I was fortunate to gain a lot from being with my parents and learned a lot from them and listening to them. But I also kind of decided to do something that wasn't easy for them to understand. Yeah. No, this particular show was called, what was it? I'm just spacing on what it was called. I didn't. The Jewel Thief, and it was a show that I co-curated with Ian. So this is Jim Hodges' wallpaper, Richard Wood's floor on top of that 12 by 12 pedestal. This is Ilana Herzog, a New York sculptor, forgetting the guy's name, the chandelier, a whole group of people. I designed these pedestals, and there's one that's like 2 by 2, and they move up to like 12 by 12 maybe, and there was a platform that's also a sculpture. There was from Jorge. Then the bleachers was out here so that you could sit on the bleachers and see the work hung high. So I designed the form of the show, of the exhibition, and there's a lot of different people's work in there. Yeah, so that was a good question.
Do you have time for one more?
Okay.
I really appreciate you showing very, very early work from your graduate time. And during that time, a lot of people were taking painting off the wall, stacking and leaning. And you influenced a lot of graduate students back then, where I remember going in the early 90s to one of your shows, and we were all excited about entering into an abstract painting and being able to walk behind one of those shapes, or like a big stage set of an abstract painting, and being able to walk behind the scaffolding and know that the big green wall was unseeable, but you knew it was there. It was a fantastic experience. You have also continued along the line to, of course, influence people, and probably have worked with graduate students. Yes, I know. And today's graduate students are still influenced by your work, but there's a real emphasis on how technology is influencing art and how they should respond to that. And I was wondering what your response as a teacher and as a fellow person within the art world. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, as a teacher, I don't tell students what to do. I mean, everybody kind of finds what they care about, and I kind of go with it and try to make, see what the driver is and what's most exciting. And so I don't tell, but as a person, as myself, and what I care about, I think it's a little, that everything is a video now is a little, there's a kind of a homogeneity to it that, this is a particular moment. The technology is amazing, that we have all this technology and it's changing and growing and all new things are possible all the time, but that everything is seen through photography and videos. And, for me, just as a person, I'm glad I do what I do because it gives me some relief from my iPhone and my computer. I like computers, and I like the abstraction that's embedded in computers and coding and that whole world. It's not like I think it's a bad thing. I don't. But that all the parts of my life happen in that one place means that I'm not interested in making art there because I spend altogether too much time there. But yes, art is about the moment, and it intersects the tools and technologies and ways of making of the whole culture and economy. So, of course, that's what's happening. So thank you. Thanks.